Of my background, I started playing guitar when I was 11 years old because my brother, who was 2.5 years older than me, he's like now 35, you know, and he was, you know, a big influence to me because he was a guitarist himself. In fact, right now he's a bassist, he's a professional bass player, and so that kind of got me started. I want to be like him because he played guitar, sang, and he looked like Elvis Presley. So I thought I could be like Elvis's guitar player. That's really, I always wanted to be a sideman, which is in a sense what I am. It all came true. So I started playing when I was 11, and then about the time when I was maybe 15 years old, I was in a band with my brother, and it seemed like this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Even though I didn't think I could make a great living at it, I just thought it'd be really nice to play on weekends. And I would do something else. I was taking drafting and architectural drawing because I thought that's what I would do for money. But it seemed to work out really well. So so that's what I did. And then in about, let me think, we started a band when I was about 18, 19 years old. And it was a band called Sweet Bottom, which some people might know that. So people are old enough.
Wait a minute.
Like me.
Wait a minute.
And it was actually a very popular band in Milwaukee, which is, by the way, which is where I'm from. I forgot to mention. That's where I was born and raised. And Sweet Bottom played a lot. We played sometimes a nightclub for 5 nights a week for 3 years straight. And that was kind of a great stopping ground for us because a lot of bands would come into town and sit in with us. We had people like Chuck Mangione sat in with us, and Frank Zappa's band came in one night. And that was probably the turning point in my career because it was Chester Thompson was on drums, who is now drummer, you know, for Phil Collins and Genesis, and another drummer named Ralph Humphreys, and Tom Fowler, the bass player, who I ended up working with later. And the keyboard player is a guy named George Duke, who actually just passed away this year. And George Duke's a great producer, great keyboard player, and I was sitting in, they were all sitting in with my band, and he was right here playing keyboards, and we played about 3 songs, and I noticed a lot of people were changing, like another guy would come up and play. So I started putting my guitar down, and George said, "Where are you going?" And I said, I was just thought maybe someone else would want to play. He said, "No, you stay right there." And I went, okay. I was 21 years old, by the way. And I'll do anything he says, and because I was a big fan of his. And so what happened from that, I'm making a long story short, is I was out in LA just on a break. Our band guys took a break, and we called George Duke just to say that we're here, you know. And he said, you know, Jean-Luc Ponty, the great jazz violinist, is looking for a guitarist, and I'd like to recommend you. And I mean, I was a big fan of Jean-Luc Ponty way back then. So he said, "I'll give him your number here at the hotel if you want me to." I said, "Yeah." But I said yes with fear in mind. I really was fearful of this because I didn't know if I could really do it. So he gave John the number. He called me at the hotel and he said, "You know, would you like to come to my house?" And he's French, by the way. And he says, I could audition you in 2 days. So I did that. I was dropped off at the house and I walked in. He had a pianist in the living room of his house. Her name was Patrice Russian, a great pianist as well. And she was like 20 years old and I'm 21 years old. And so that's how I auditioned for him. And I can read music, but I'm not a great reader. I'm not a great sight reader. I can write orchestrations, I can do all that, but I don't sight read very well because I don't do it that often. You have to do that very often to do it. And, but he put music in front of me, and the first song he put in front of me was called Poly Folk Dance, which means polyrhythms, which means all these different time signatures against other, and I'm going, oh my God. So one thing I'm good at is I can look at something and kind of run it through really slowly and memorize. So I just used it as a crutch, but I wasn't reading that well, but I read this by memory. So we went through that song, we went through another song, we went through 3 songs, and from that, he liked my playing. And he said, well, we'll be doing something maybe in the next 3-4 months, and would you like to do it? And of course I would. Again, you know, going from a band in Milwaukee to someone like him was a big step for me, and I was very nervous about it, and I thought, I know what's going to happen. We're going to start rehearsing, and then I'm going to get fired. You really do think that. We're all very insecure that way. I mean, most of us. And I'm one of them. And but it all worked out. I ended up working with him for 3 years. And then when I was on a break and Jean-Luc had no work coming up, I got a call from, in fact, the manager of Jean-Luc Ponty said he got a call from the manager of Genesis, and they're looking for a guitarist because their guitarist Steve Hackett left. And I went, oh my God. You know, I mean, and I loved Genesis by a couple albums that I heard that Jean-Luc Ponty turned me onto. And they so happened to be A Trick of the Tail and Wind and Wuthering, which are two of the first records that Phil Collins became the lead vocalist with, because prior to that it was Peter Gabriel. And I didn't really hear that much of Peter Gabriel at that time. I learned later about him. And so I went to my audition, and which was in New York, and Mike Rutherford was the only one there. I thought the whole band was going to be there, and it was just Mike Rutherford. And it was kind of a setup like this, where there was just some monitors and 2 pedal boards, because I didn't have anything. I had a wah-wah. That was my pedal. But they had sent me a cassette with 5 songs on it. And these all had working titles. Most of them had working titles because they were from their newest album, which was called And Then There Were Three. This was 1978. And one song was called 5/8, which is actually a song that ended up to be called Down and Out. Another one was called Calypso, and it was Follow You, Follow Me, which became a hit song. And I can't remember the other one, but then they had some older ones. Squonk was one of them, one of Phil Collins' first songs he ever sang with them as a lead vocalist. And Dance on a Volcano. So I learned these songs. I sat in my bedroom and just learned these things and came there prepared. And which is something is really important about being prepared. And not only did I learn those songs, but I bought all of their albums and tried to learn everything I could about this band. And so what happened is I sat down with Mike, and they played tracks through a monitor, just like what I'm doing here, but it was their band. And I play along with it. And we played about a minute or 2 of each song. He would stop it, run the cassette. Remember cassettes? He would run the cassette. He'd stop and go, okay, that's fine, let's go to the next one. And you'd go to the next song, play about a minute or 2, I'd play along. After we did 3 songs, or 4 songs, he said, I think you're the one. And I thought, I didn't do anything that spectacular. I mean, I was just playing along with these things, and I did them okay and everything. So after that happened, he said, I'll meet you at the Plaza Hotel in New York. I'll meet you there, and I'll tell you what songs you have to learn for the tour. And so what happened is I finally got together with him, because he said he had 4 other guitarists to audition that day, because they already auditioned 25 guitar players apparently, or more, in England, and they didn't find someone they wanted. And so I got together with Mike, and my first question to him was, why did you pick me? And he said, well, number one, other guitarists came here unprepared. One guy said, what key do you want me to play this song in? And another guy said, what style? In other words, they didn't listen to the cassettes. They didn't listen to what they were supposed to prepare for this. And that's a big thing, and at least to me. And so he said, that's why, because I said, a couple of the guys on this list, I knew their names. I'm not going to say who they were, but I knew these names by who they played with occasionally. And they are all very good. The guitarists that were auditioning were good enough to do this, to play with Genesis, I think. But they weren't prepared. So that is a big part of what I do. Whenever I go into an audition, when I audition with Gino Vanelli, I don't know if anybody knows Gino Vanelli, and Jean-Luc Ponty, Gino Vanelli, and Genesis, I was very, very prepared before I went in. I just would buy all the records, figure out where they're coming from, and that's a very important thing. Does anybody have any questions about anyone?